Thank you so much for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, President Joe Biden signs the big infrastructure bill, but still faces major roadblocks over his Build Back Better social spending bill, all amid concerns over the highest inflation rate in more than 30 years. And 17 missionaries remain trapped in Haiti. We're going to hear from a priest who was abducted earlier this year by the same gang members. He'll explain how he endured and how he was finally set free. Plus, while the United States remains divided over how to deal with the crisis on the southern border, one European nation has taken strong action, even in the face of severe criticism.
We will protect our border, we will withstand the pressure, and we will continue to stick to our own right, to make our own decision.
And a fifth grader receives an unexpected Christmas present, a visit from her mom at school. We'll tell you why it was so special. All this and more are ahead next.
This is CBN Newswatch.
And we begin this half hour with President Joe Biden set to sign the infrastructure bill into law today, but his massive social spending and climate change bill remains in jeopardy as his popularity continues to plummet, and Democrats have plunged in the polls as well. Del Hurd is on the story.
As the House prepares to take up Part 2 of Joe Biden's infrastructure plan, the $1.75 trillion Build Back Better Act, his plummeting poll numbers have some wondering if he can get the political support he needs to pass it. Biden's approval rating stands at 41%, the lowest of his presidency. 55% disapprove of his handling of the economy, and if the midterm elections were held today, Americans would vote 51% Republican and only 41% Democrat, the widest margin since 1981. Inflation is the highest in 30 years, 6.2%. One sign of the times, Dollar Tree has announced it will be raising prices on some items by as much as $1.50. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says it's the pandemic and not all the big spending in Washington that has fueled inflation.
The pandemic has been calling the shots for the economy and for inflation. And if we want to get inflation down, I think continuing to make progress against the pandemic is the most important thing we can do.
And Joe Biden's economic advisor says passing the expensive almost $2 trillion Build Back Better legislation is the key to fighting inflation, which is exactly the opposite from standard economic thinking.
This, more than anything, will go at the costs that Americans face. You talk about health care, one of the biggest costs that American families face. This will lower prescription drug prices, put a cap on prescription drug costs for our seniors.
Economist Stephen Moore told CBN's Faith Nation program, no, that won't lower inflation.
This is kind of a laughable claim by the Biden administration. I think anybody, even with a junior high school education, knows that if you print more money and borrow more money, trillions of dollars, that's going to make inflation worse, not better.
The House is expected to pass Biden's giant social spending plan this week, but the White House needed 19 Republicans to pass the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and so far no Republicans support this latest bill. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says that if it gets to the Senate, West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin and fellow moderate Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona will have a say. Both have opposed the high price of the spending bill. Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is urging the White House to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help bring down gasoline prices. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Haitian gang members are still demanding ransom for the Christian missionaries abducted a month ago. We're now learning more about this notorious gang from a Catholic priest who faced them. In the CBN News exclusive, he's sharing how his faith sustained him and how he was finally released. Here's George Thomas.
On April 11th, Catholic priest Jean-Nicaisse, along with 9 other priests and nuns, were on their way to install a fellow church member as leader of a new parish. When they reached on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince, more than a dozen heavily armed gang members stopped their vehicle.
I was kidnapped.
Millian tells CBN News that the 400 Mawozo gang, the same group behind the October kidnappings of 17 missionaries, also abducted him. What did they demand from you?
They demand money.
How much?
1 million.
1 million US dollars?
$1 million.
$1 million per person, the same amount they demanded for the 16 Americans and 1 Canadian kidnapped last month after visiting a Haitian orphanage. A U.S. government official tells Reuters they have evidence that some of the missionaries are still alive.
My faith helped me a lot.
Milian says the gang, made up of mostly young men and teenagers, would move them around to several locations. Often blindfolded, they slept on floors and had little to eat. Milian said he and the others drew strength from prayer times. They had one Bible, which they would read when guards weren't around.
We said a moment of prayer in the morning, a moment of prayer in the midday, and a moment of prayer during the night.
Milian's moment of freedom came 20 days later, after his parish paid an undisclosed ransom amount to the gang. This week, Milian led Mass at his church in Port-au-Prince and urged congregants to pray for the safe release of the 17 missionaries. A leader of the Mawozo gang has threatened to kill the missionaries if their ransom demands aren't met.
I ask every friend of mine to pray for the American people and the Canadian one.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Another setback for President Biden's COVID vaccine mandate. Friday, a 3-judge panel ruled its block on the mandate will remain in effect, calling it, quote, fatally flawed and staggeringly overbroad. It said that the mandate raises serious constitutional concerns. The ruling came from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which originally blocked the mandate from going into effect. Meanwhile, the number of COVID cases is expected to rise again as winter arrives, but experts don't believe it will be as bad as last year.
We're expecting the surge this winter to be much lower than what we have seen last winter, simply because more people are vaccinated. Cases will go up, but mortality will not go proportional to what we have seen before.
Some states have already begun rolling out vaccines for booster shots. More than 100 participants from around the world took part in the Israeli government press office's 5th Christian Media Summit last week. Because of COVID-19, it was held online for the 2nd year in a row. And as CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl shows us, the event focused on the Abraham Accords.
Israel's President Isaac Herzog welcomed the attendees on the Zoom meeting.
It is a pleasure to welcome you to this year's Christian Media Summit under the heading entitled Abraham Accords and Abrahamic Religions, Partners in Peace. What a beautiful title.
Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett spoke of the challenge of radical militant Islam in the Middle East and Israel's relationship to Christians.
In the Middle East, there's only one place that fully protects Christian life, where the Christian community is growing, thriving, and prospering, and that's in the state of Israel.
Israel signed the historic Abraham Accords with 4 Arab states, starting with the United Arab Emirates last year. Hadassah Schwartz and Nitzan Chen from the government press office honored former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for his work in bringing about those accords.
The Abraham Accords were a historic turning point. This is the first time that Israel made peace for peace. Peace with 4 Arab nations, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and the Sudan. Peace that was benefiting the peoples of both sides in the economy, in trade, in tourism, in technology.
Cairo's company founder Johnny Moore addressed the issue of anti-Semitism.
Centuries of anti-Semitism, centuries of conflict between the communities, centuries of harm. And yet now, 80 million evangelicals in the United States, 800 million evangelicals around the world, are the great firewall against anti-Semitism. We are living in the golden age of Jewish Christian friendship.
Bishop Glenn Plummer spoke about Black Zionism.
Dr. Martin Luther King probably is the one who best defined it. And so this is not a new concept. I only mention him because that's 50 plus years ago. And Dr. King himself defined Zionism.
Panels examined press coverage in the UAE and Bahrain since the Accords, as well as how the Abraham Accords have impacted the relationship between Israeli Arabs and Jews. The conference ended with the yearning of Jews from around the world for millennia and the declaration of many Christians now.
Jerusalem is here in our heart, waiting for you to come and visit, and to that we say together, next year in Jerusalem.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, one was a president, the other a former slave, how Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass defined the United States after the Civil War. We're going to have a look at their complex relationship right after this. Welcome back. A president and a former slave, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, defined Civil War-era America. Fox News host Brian Kilmeade explores the complicated relationship between these two historic figures in his latest book. He spoke with CBN's Jenna Browder about the unlikely alliance between the president and the freedom fighter.
From George Washington and Thomas Jefferson to Sam Houston, Brian Kilmeade has written about them all. And moving right on down the line in American history, his newest book intertwines the stories of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass.
I wanted to move gradually up until I hit the future.
But instead of focusing on just one man this time,
I thought, what about how they interacted together and how they made the country better and the incredible obstacles they had to overcome to do what they did.
And that resulted in the president and the freedom fighter, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and their battle to save America's soul. Brian tells the little-known story of how these two American heroes moved from strong disagreement to friendship, and in the process changed the course of history. Both men had to overcome huge adversity, especially Douglass, who was born a slave.
Born a slave, literally sold, and then after one failed escape, finally gets out, was able to live his life, and remarkably, within 7 years, is writing a biography, and it becomes one of the most respected intellects and speakers in the world.
And Lincoln, born into abject poverty, whose parents were illiterate.
And then you have Lincoln, who is basically a self-taught guy. They both had a couple of similarities. They had a lot of similarities. They had a thirst for education. They were going to find out some way, somehow. They were going to barter, do work for a book. They would just have a chance to read and learn about a story. They were buried in the Bible and great thinkers their entire life.
Despite their similarities, there were also deep differences. Most notably, how to approach the big issue of the day, slavery.
You write about how Lincoln wanted to abolish it, but thought that doing it too quickly would really hurt the country.
What happens is, there's no doubt about it, Lincoln evolved. He was not really exposed that much to slavery. Only 1% of all the slaves were in the North. The rest were in the South.
After the United States won its independence, the South built an economy dependent on slavery. Southerners felt an attack on that would destroy their economy and way of life. The North wanted freedom, although not necessarily equality. They saw slavery as morally wrong.
The minute Lincoln gets elected and 7 states leave before he can get to the White House, Frederick Douglass like, okay, Emancipation Proclamation, free the slaves, let us fight.
But President Lincoln wasn't ready to move that fast. He knew the North wasn't ready and risked losing half of his army by rushing the process.
And Frederick Douglass had a newspaper that he started, and he would write and he lambasted Lincoln. You let me down, going halfway. This is not what you promised. And as inaugural, in an effort to get us reunified, he said, keep your slaves, we'll work it out. Just come back. And they said no. And that was, Frederick Douglass celebrated that, and Lincoln knew we're in for a war. They thought it would be 90 days, and it was 4 years, and it cost between 600 and 700,000 lives, which is just unthinkable.
Through time, though, the men came to respect one another and even form a friendship.
And then Lincoln would evolve, and it was timing. And people would be pushing him to do it. He's like, I'm not ready. He wrote it out. It wasn't ready. And he's so impatient. Then he realized we need a big win. After a big win, I'm not only going to come out with the Emancipation Proclamation, I'm going to allow African Americans to fight for their freedom. And when he finally gets a chance to meet Douglass, I don't want to give the whole book away, but you know it historically, Douglass realizes this guy that was frustrating him for the longest time, that he saw so much promise in, was the honest, great man he always thought he was. He saw authenticity, kindness, and greatness. And that was just in the moments in which they met.
And is there a lesson in this book and this story of these two men for us today here?
Yeah, they wanted to be Americans. They want to make America better. So they studied the founding fathers. They studied where we came from. And they said, okay, my country's imperfect, so let's make it better. right? Let's not disparage it. Let's do it in a way that's, call it out, but make it better.
It's the great democratic experiment, and these two men made it better. Not only that, together their grit and determination helped the United States begin to live up to its ideals.
Brian, I don't want to get ahead of my skis, but I think a lot of our viewers, they'll pick up this book and then they'll finish it and they'll say, all right, what's next?
No idea. I have no idea.
Writing a book like this is a huge deep dive. Brian says he's going to finish this publicity tour and then maybe this spring start thinking about his next topic. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Still ahead, how one European nation's answer to its border crisis could be a model for the United States. We're going to take a look at their solution when we come back. The chaos at our southern border continues as America's immigration policies are mired in politics and culture wars. One European nation has taken strong action to protect its border, even in the face of intense global criticism. Our Jennifer Wishon traveled to Hungary for this firsthand account.
This is the border between Serbia and Hungary. This is the fence, often referred to as a wall, that draws so much criticism from Western Europe and much of the world. It went up 6 years ago as hundreds of thousands of migrants from Syria and other countries stormed through this Central European country on their way to Germany. A scene that's repeated itself. Today, a warning broadcast in 7 languages.
Approaching the border fence or touching it can cause injury and pain. I urge you to refrain from committing the crime.
Border police say it's still mainly young men trying to cross the border, often approaching the fence in military formations. Hundreds of migrants attempt to cross each day. Riot teams remain on standby, and now officials are bracing for another wave from Afghanistan.
Around 400 Afghans, including the family members, are now in Hungary, and we definitely will take care of them. But here there's a full stop. We will not receive anyone else. We will protect our border, we will withstand the pressure, and we will continue to stick to our own right, to make our own decision whom we allow to enter the territory of our country and with whom we are ready to live together.
We're getting an aerial view of the border. Hungarian officials tell us in the summer of 2015, 150,000 refugees were walking across the border every month. They walked miles across a great expanse of quiet farmland, shocking residents.
A lot of problems there. There were a lot of damage in the agriculture. There were some farms, and just went into the houses, which was very much irritating to the people living here.
General Bakandi George, Hungary's chief national security advisor, was waiting for us when we landed at the border. Could you have curbed this problem without a fence?
Egészen biztosan nem. Kerítés kellett ahhoz, hogy az előzönlést, a határátlépést akadályozzák. Ez nem megy másképp.
In a country with a history of oppressive occupations and a post-World War I treaty that dramatically reduced its size, Hungary is unapologetic about preserving its culture built on the foundation of Christianity.
És nyilvánvalóan a migráció nagyon...
Migration already brought forward huge cultural clash and will bring even more.
Under Soviet rule, Pastor Nemeth Sandor was forced to practice his faith underground. Today, he leads the largest evangelical church in the country.
Tragikus hibának tartanám.
I believe it's a tragic mistake.
Hogy Pál apostolnak az örökségét eltékozolná Európa.
Waste the heritage of the Apostle Paul.
Isten Pál apostolt Európába küldte.
God sent the Apostle Paul.
Ő rakta le Európában a kereszténységnek az alapját.
He laid the foundations of Christianity on this continent.
Senior Hungarian officials tell CBN News it's simple. They don't want a multicultural society.
We think that migration is harmful. It creates parallel societies. People losing their roots and their traditions. Also, promoting migration gives room to trafficking organizations and have also many security concerns.
Asbay and other officials say while they're not opposed to legal migration, the government seeks to help people where they are, rather than transporting them to a foreign culture. And in the face of criticism from the European Union and much of the world, Hungary sees securing its borders as key to its survival.
The Judeo-Christian revelation and values are something I am willing to fight for at the moment.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, reporting from Hungary's southern border.
Most children aren't fans of their parents visiting them at school, but we're going to tell you why one daughter was so happy and surprised to see her mom show up. We come back. Stay with us. And welcome back to CBN News Watch. An Arizona fifth grader received an early Christmas present. Her mom, Army Staff Sergeant Madeline Perez, surprised her daughter at school after serving several months overseas. She was met with a double take, then tears. Perez didn't come empty-handed, bringing balloons and treats, but she quickly made room to hug her daughter, who she hadn't seen since January. Perez said it's heartbreaking being away from family, but she is thankful that her daughter has her family's support, and the holidays this year will be even sweeter. Time now for your Monday motivation. I pray this message will inspire and jumpstart your work week. Things may look bad, but know this. You think things are falling apart, but they're actually falling into place. So hold on to hope and hold on to faith, knowing your Heavenly Father is working out all things together for your good, and He cares for you. I pray you have a marvelous Monday and a wonderful rest of the week. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody.